but if you have a fellow in Toledo or in Dayton or pick the place, and he's supplying 80% of his products are going to GM, 20% to Ford, and GM is forced into some sort of disastrous situation, what happens to this fellow? He loses 80% of his business, he's out. How would we keep him going? So that's the great risk, is that the supplier network for Ford could get disrupted. So it's a good news, bad news thing. I think that I can promise you that they're thinking about that real hard in Dearborn right now.
You mentioned several times in your presentation about buying American. What was your reaction to the report of the news conference that General Motors had this week that indicated they might consider importing General Motors cars into the United States?
Well, in some senses, it's extremely rational. I mean, what we as a nation are saying to General Motors is, we want you to strip down your cost structure to match the cost structure of the transplants. Well, we've heard all about your workers getting $28 an hour in benefits, and we've heard all about that neat middle-class life up there in Michigan, Ohio, Kansas, Texas, all over the country. But we as a nation don't want that anymore. We want you to meet the cost structure of the transplants. That's an amazing statement. As a nation, we've said that. We want you to strip down and be as competitive as these transplants. By bringing in a car from China, and I went to China to look at this for my book, if they were able to bring in cars from China, they could completely disrupt the transplant model. They could undercut Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, all those guys. Now, what do we think about that? American consumer would make out like gangbusters. Gangbusters. Here come a steady new stream of cheaper cars. The Aveo is already coming in from Korea. So, from a consumer's point of view, that's great. Isn't that what we're saying to General Motors? That we want you to drive down your cost structure, to strip it down, we want you to fire people in factories, we want you to close factories. So I understand that it's bitter, and I understand that it's not easy, but if General Motors were to do that, it would be a supremely rational thing. It would disrupt anything that Toyota could do. So what the American government is not saying to General Motors is, we think you should maintain your factories. We think you should maintain this quality of life, this standard of living for these people. The American government's not saying that. I mean, even the Democratic government is saying, strip it down. So, and the fact of the matter is, GM's already selling 60 to 65% of its sales are outside the United States. 60, probably more than half, certainly, of its people are outside the United States. It never again is going to be a company that is overwhelmingly concentrated in southeastern Michigan and northern Ohio. I mean, that old GM is shattered. The new GM, if it survives, will be a much more globalized GM. And so then the question becomes, well, is it in American economic interest to have a company like that? And my answer to you would be yes, that we need GM to be globally competitive against Toyota and Volkswagen, and that means that they have to be as global as those guys are. They have to be able to move ideas and designs and parts across national borders as freely as those guys do. So if they are a globalized GM, I think they can defend, at some point we can reach a point where they can defend jobs in communities, in design studios, and factories, and office buildings. They'll reach a point where they can defend and start to gain again. So the whole series of very complicated issues here, but I think my bottom line, the answer to your question is, we're asking General Motors to find cheaper ways of doing things, and this is one of them.
Let's go back just a little bit to when things really started to roll, and that was the appearance of the three manufacturers coming before the committee asking for bailout money. Much was made of the hullabaloo of coming in on their private jets and so on. This grabbed the headlines and, of course, wasn't the real story behind what was happening. What was happening is they came in apparently without a plan to save the industry, all three of them. None of them presented a plan during those hearings to change what they were doing and to warrant the loans that they were asking for to bail out the companies. I can't believe they didn't have plans to go forward. No corporation in their right mind exists without a plan. What happened at that time? Did they not have a plan? If they did, why didn't they present it?
let me tell you a story. Last time I interviewed Rick Wagner in his office in the Renaissance Center, he said to me, he said, there's so many people out there talking about this business that don't really understand what they're talking about. Like, who's this guy, Peter Morici, the fellow from the University of Maryland, a cute little economist who wears bow ties. So we joked about that up in the 28th or 29th floor of the Ren Center. Then I turned on the TV one day and to watch Rick testify, and who's sitting next to him but Peter Morici? so I thought, wow, what must Mr. Wagner be feeling about that? Well, that was a spectacularly bad period. Flying in by airplanes was obviously seized on by the media as a symbol of arrogance. And I was so distraught that the media was not focused on the real issues, but was focused on taking this cheap shot. They were not well prepared. The three they came in, they were speaking in business terms, in terms of statistics, and speaking dryly. They had their targeted points they wanted to make. They were not well prepared. They did not understand the national zeitgeist at that moment. Americans were scared. Americans were looking for people to blame. And on these panels were senators and representatives who were playing for the cameras, who knew how to play to the cameras, who knew how to be folksy, and how to break things down to terms that people could understand. So the three of them got their heads handed to them by Congress. It was widely viewed and was hugely influential in shaping public opinions toward them. I think the GM and others were surprised by a couple of changes in the American political environment. One, they're surprised by the rising political power of the transplant states. Shelby from Alabama, who has 4 transplants in his state, was just venomous, just dripping with hate. He, in my view, he wants to see the big three, the domestic three, suffer. He wants to see those jobs come down to Alabama. He's playing a very cynical game in trying to undermine the credibility of these guys. So this is one of the great surprises, that they didn't understand the Southern transplant rise. They didn't understand the rise of the environmental movement from California. And they didn't understand that in this great American angst, great American concern about what's happening to the economy, that the animosity would be directed at them. They didn't think that they were the source of what went wrong in the economy. They thought they were victims. So they came to town thinking, well, of course Congress is going to want to help us. Of course Congress is going to recognize the importance we play in the American economy. But so they were blindsided, and in terms of how they prepared their testimony, in terms of their expectation of what to expect. So I've tried to get to the bottom of what happened there, and I've never been able to understand it. But it was a clearly tragic moment for the domestic three.
Thank you. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to William Holstein, author and respected journalist. Thank you, Mr. Holstein. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.